Action.
Oh, I'm going to take this off, shouldn't I, up here so you can hear me. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. It's a beautiful sunny day. A little chilly, but it's going to warm up today. Thank you for being with us this morning. I think all of you know about the mask requirement for the sanctuary, just to keep us all safe, and that there's masks back there if you find you need to grab one. And I think we might have one newcomer in the house, and I think he's already been given a gift bag back there. So welcome, Jack. Good to have you with us today. We're delighted to have Linda and Joel with us as doing our music today. Thank you for joining us. Always a treat. I think they might be doing a little Christmas music today, so it's wonderful to get into that season. So we always begin with prayer and begin to think about prayer. We also have a joys and concerns table back there if you at any point want to light a candle for someone or something you are lifting up into the light, holding the high truth about. Feel free to do that at any time. And we begin to think about what we are lifting up in our hearts and minds today. Prayers for ourselves, for loved ones, for our community, prayers for healing, prayers for peace. We'll hold that in our hearts and minds as Linda and Joel guide us into prayer with a beautiful song by Michael Gott called A Light in the World. For everyone we're lifting up in prayer this morning, for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our neighbors, for living beings across the globe, we affirm this ultimate truth of our oneness with God, our absolute knowledge that we are connected at depth with that power and presence, that wellspring of wisdom and of healing energy we draw from by day and by night, moment by moment. This is the truth for each one of us. Whatever our situations, whatever challenges we might be facing, the power of God is with us in the midst of it, strengthening us, steadying us, and guiding us forward. We know that truth for everyone we're lifting up in prayer this morning, for everyone in our prayer community. How grateful we are to know that at all times and in all places and circumstances, we are one with the living God, and that makes all things possible. So we come out of this time of prayer with grateful hearts and minds, knowing it is so, and so it is. will have another song for us. I think it's a traditional Irish melody, but words by the poet Christina Rossetti called Love Came Down at Christmas. Thinking of it in the kind of the broadest sense of healing, but I was kind of drawing on my supply of healing jokes about healing this morning, and have some golden oldies for you today, a couple of them. There's this one about doctor and patient kind of dialogue. The patient had been in and was getting test results and so on. The doctor said, well, I have some bad news for you, some bad news and some very bad news. And the guy said, well, okay, well, give me the bad news first. And the doctor says, well, the lab called with your test results. You have 24 hours to live. And the guy says, well, how could anything be worse than that? What's the very bad news? He said, well, I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. That's bad. And then I like this one, too. I thought I'd do this one, too. The guy went to the doctor who was suffering with just a really miserable cold one winter. And he goes in, and doctor gives him an injection of something, and he goes away, and he's just no better. So he goes back in a couple of weeks, and the doctor says, okay, well, here's what you should do. You should go home, take a hot bath, and then just get up and, and throw open all the windows, let that good winter air blow in the house. And the guy goes, well, doc, I've wound up with pneumonia. And he says, I know, I can cure pneumonia. Golden oldies. But talking about healing, and thinking about healing in a broader sense today, in our culture, we tend to, the focus is on, of our medicine, our system is typically kind of narrow on, do you have a disease or not, treating, fixing whatever disease or dysfunction you're dealing with. But we're thinking more today in terms of well-being. I caught an interview recently on onbeing.org, one of my favorite little podcasts I go to, and there was an interview with the U.S. Surgeon General, who's really believes in a broader definition of health and wellness. He really talks about well-being and wants to kind of redefine public health in that way. And I think we're thinking about well-being more since the pandemic. We had more time to think about it. What does it take to feel really well? It isn't just a matter of things that are measurable statistics. It's prompted a lot of reflection on on self-care, on being well in a broader sense, of having peace, of feeling energy, of how to live with a greater sense of wholeness, of well-being. I think there's been a lot of reflection on that, caused by the isolation, the disconnect, the losses that we've suffered over the last year or so. I think there have been a lot of people given an opportunity and seizing it to do some reflecting on, am I living in a way that brings a feeling of well-being? Am I living in a way that brings me peace? Are my relationships nurturing for me? Is my community, do I have a nourishing community that gives me a sense of well-being? Does my work give me a sense of well-being? And I think that there are people making some changes in that regard, given what we've been through, reevaluating how they feel about their work. A lot of people moving closer to family, realizing that priority of family or dear ones as a result of this kind of reflection. So I kind of love that we have a Surgeon General now. His name is Vivek Murthy, who sees health and public health in this much broader way about how to thrive, not just absence of disease, but how to thrive, and how to live in a community that helps you to thrive. And he said he learned this from his parents growing up. They were his first teachers in medicine, in what they modeled and taught about how to live in a way that brings you a sense of well-being. This is a quote from his interview. He said, it wasn't enough, this is what he learned from his parents, it wasn't enough not to be ill. There was a whole spectrum on which we could live and operate. And part of thriving in life was doing the things that allowed you to function on the highest end of your scale, where you were being who you were, enjoying life, contributing to the welfare of others and to society in a way that can move us all forward and help us get through difficult times. Like say, a pandemic. That kind of well-being, it's beyond just making sure you don't have a disease. It's much broader than that. Or just you and your loved ones don't have a disease. How do we live in a way that will give us resources, wholeness, well-being, to help us through other challenges when they might arise, and to keep us living at the top end of our scale? I really particularly like that phrase, don't you? Living at the high end of your scale. That's well-being. And it seems to me this is a time where we're really doing some deep reflection on that, and there might be a kind of a window of opportunity here to make some changes, think about some things in a different way that will bring us closer to that sense of well-being. I think our spiritual teachers have emphasized well-being more than just a narrow sense of being healthy, free of disease. Well-being is more than that. Living well, thriving is more than that. I think that's in our spiritual teachings. Always like that Jesus' only commandments that are in the scriptures kind of echo this broader sense of how to live well. It's from this is from Matthew 22. It's a teaching story, and there's a lawyer in the crowd. He's asking him, what's the greatest commandment? Thinking out of Jewish law, what is the greatest commandment of all? And Jesus' reply, the only commandments he mentioned in all the Gospels, love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. It all comes down to that. You know, love God, love goodness, love with all your heart, mind, and soul, with your whole self. Whole self, that's how we experience well-being. And love your neighbor in that way too. Extend that to others. It's very comprehensive, a very broad sense about how to live well, how to thrive. And it involves all of us, not just taking care of myself, not just trying to avoid disease for me and mine, but living in the high end of the scale, living in this broader way that cultivates well-being for us all. It's very much like our Surgeon General's definition of well-being, living in a way that you're being who you are, practicing loving kindness with yourself and others, with your community. I think there's good reason this is the only commandment Jesus uttered according to the Gospels. It's because these are the commandments these guidelines for living well will enable us to live fully and joyfully and to support one another in that. Guidance for living at the high end of our scale. And I think that's maybe something just to kind of make a note about in terms of living at the high end of your scale. I was thinking about that, what that means for me. I think that's a very shifting thing for all of us, what that means. Are you living at the high end of your scale right now? Am I? I think it shifts during our life. And there are some times where I'm in more of a survival mode. I've got to take care of what's before me to take care of. And then get back, but as soon as we can, to get back to that notion of, to live really with a sense of well-being, we need to go beyond that. Get back to being in touch with others, to practicing more kindness, sharing the good wherever we can, because that enables us to really live at that higher, more satisfying end of the scale of our lives. How do we cultivate well-being, I guess, is what I find myself thinking about. What's involved in it? I think we've learned quite a lot about it over the past year or so, as we've been dealing with challenges, as we've dealt with more isolation and more questions about things. Certain things are a part of living with well-being. I think one of them, and we've had lots of opportunities to practice this the last year or so, is learning to experience solitude in a positive way. Not just being alone, but quality being alone, learning ways to be comfortable being alone with yourself. We've all had some practice in that over the last year or two, haven't we? And I think there's blessings in that can guide us toward a greater sense of well-being if we can enjoy being alone with ourselves. We've learned a lot about connection, and this is a deep part of living with well-being. Real connections with others, not just superficial ones, but real connections with others. And it doesn't take an incredible amount of time or energy, but we all know what it feels like if you have 5 minutes of someone's direct attention, you're really being listened to, the impact of that. And I think over the last year or so, when we had to give up so many of our kind of routine community interactions, sometimes we had to get together by Zoom or things like that. It would still work if we could really feel like we were really connecting with someone else in a genuine way. We need that. That's a part of living with well-being. Practicing small acts of kindness, even tiny things, every day. I think we've learned that over the last year or so too. That must be a part of an experience of well-being. We need to feel like we're doing something that's a blessing to somebody, whatever it is. A kindness we're doing, even if it's just making a phone call, checking on somebody, putting a note in the mail, little acts of kindness. And another big one is appreciation. These all seem to have to do with awareness. These things have to do with cultivating well-being. To appreciate means to really be aware of the blessing of something, to really appreciate it in fullness, whether that's in a person or in anything you're experiencing in life. These are kind of the things, the way we cultivate a sense of well-being, really appreciating, really being attentive, having genuine connection with others, being able to really be alone with ourselves in comfort and peace. Those are all aspects of having a sense of well-being. There's a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin, Richard Davidson, who has a list of these things he calls micro-practices for cultivating a deeper sense of well-being, and these mostly have to do with appreciation. So one of the things he as a micro-practice, something that only takes a minute or two. That's what he means by kind of a micro-practice. One of them he advocates and suggests and practices routinely himself is to really consider the food on his table before he eats. Before taking a bite, somewhere in there, take a moment or two to really reflect on where that food came from and all the hands that helped to grow it and produce it and package it and drive it to you and get it to your store where you can pick it up, and the sun and the water and the light that went into making that. Really develop an appreciation for what a blessing it is to have that meal before you. It made me think of Thich Nhat Hanh. He's very keen on that kind of thing too. If you're going to have a cup of tea, really regard that tea, really drink it. Don't do everything in a distracted way, gulping things down and munching things without really regarding. And we've all eaten that way, haven't we? But to really regard, take a minute. That's all it takes. 1 or 2 minutes to really think, this food I'm being nourished by, what a blessing it is. Everything that went into this. Another one he practices often, and I haven't done it myself, and I thought, I'm going to adopt this. This seems like a really good practice. He recommends scanning your calendar for a couple minutes before beginning the activities of your day. I still keep a paper calendar book. Do any of you? How many paper calendar people? Yeah, it's the best. I'm sorry, I'm biased. I like to have that in my little book, and I can see my whole week and look at it day by day. I know some people keep it in their phones, and if that works for you, that's do it that way too. It certainly can work that way too. But he says beginning of each day, he takes a minute or two, and he just scans his calendar for the day, the appointments he has, the people he's going to interact with in person or on the phone, or send notes to, the meetings he might be going to, and he builds an appreciation for the people he's going to interact with, what he admires about them. He thinks about how he wants that interaction to go, the kind of spirit he wants that communication to have, of loving kindness, of mutual respect, of admiration. He builds a sense of that before heading into his day, and it cultivates a sense of a really appreciation and gratitude for the details of your life, day by day like that, before just rushing into it, which I do far too often. You ever get going, it's like you've already hit the ground running, it's like you already think you're behind, you got to rush to, tick things off. That is not the way to really appreciate the moment of your life or have a feeling of well-being. I think he's right. These little micro practices can make a huge difference, and he makes the very strong point that it takes very little to build a deeper sense of well-being. Little things, a minute or two of real gratitude, of real appreciation, of real connection. A couple of minutes where somebody really looks at you and asks you, how are you today? How are you feeling? Somebody really paying attention to you, or you paying attention to another. These things can be deeply nurturing and resonate deeply and grow within us because they're already in us, really. This is our essential nature. And when we practice these little kindnesses and moments of gratefulness, it resonates in us and it builds in us a deeper and deeper sense of well-being. And it doesn't take as much as we think it might. Just little things can make a huge difference. And it's really going on around us all the time. I was struck by a story. It always happens whenever I'm thinking about an idea. I start seeing stories of it or examples of it all around me during the week. And I caught a story on, I think it was on CBS Sunday Morning last week, about a little town in Vermont, Norwich, Vermont. A very small town, and they have a local store that everybody in town kind of described it as the heart of the town. A little general store called Dan and Witt's, run by owner Dan Fraser. His father ran it before him, and his grandfather before him. This general store has been in operation for more than 100 years. And over the past year or so, things are getting very complicated in terms of staffing stores and businesses. He lost all his employees little by little. He was down to no employees. Just him, trying to keep it rolling. And he was pretty desperate for help. He put a big help wanted sign in the door and really pretty much made it clear to everybody that he was probably going to have to close the store, not having the staff he needed. And you could tell he was very emotional about it. He was interviewed about it. He said he invested his whole life in that store. This wasn't just another job. Well, the community apparently felt the same way, because it's more than just expressing sympathy or concern. They all decided to apply for jobs. They didn't need these jobs. They did it as an act of loving kindness and of service to their community, for whom the store was the heart of the town. Everybody kept saying that. So more than 20 people applied for jobs in this general store, from all walks of life. There was an RN, there was a finance director who applied for a job in the deli. There was a retired doctor who was working at the checkout. There was a therapist, second grade teacher, a professor of psychology, stocking shelves, and sweeping up. All these folks in the community stepping up to save their local market. And not only that, they decided to donate their hourly wages, all of them, to a few much-loved charities. by the store owner, and that they all wanted to support as well. So all those hourly wages are spreading the good even farther than that one local store. What a beautiful story. Dan Fraser kind of summed it up. He said, the way this community stepped up for him, he was like teary. He said, sometimes it takes a crisis to appreciate what you have. They have a wonderful community of people who step up for each other. People living at the high end of their scale, where they realize my well-being, my happiness, my flourishing is not just me and trying to keep myself or my loved ones well. It's my community. It's taking care of each other. It's putting myself out there a little bit so that we can all thrive together and deal with challenges together. People living at the high end of their scale. And you can bet those people working away in that store, they were enjoying their lives too. They were feeling good about themselves. They were feeling a greater sense of happiness that others were doing well. Their store was continuing. They were contributing to the flourishing of their small town. I love that. And this is going on all around us. I know there's organizations and people very active in our community. I'm hearing about one here in town hall. I think you were telling me about it. Neighbors helping neighbors. If there are people who need help in their yards or homes that they can't do anymore, there's volunteers rallying to do that, to show up and do yard work for somebody who can't do it. We've got an organization like that in Dublin too, in Dublin. It's going on all the time. It goes on in our church, little ways we kind of step up for each other a little bit, drop off a meal, stop by, call somebody up, ask how they're doing. This is the way we all can live at that high end of our scale and deepen our own sense of well-being as we support others at the same time. And then I think as we move forward, we do so with greater strength and resilience so that when challenges arise, like what we've been through the last year or two, we have the resources and the know-how to deal with it. Practicing well-being, I think it's something we can do every day in ways, little ways, that make a huge difference in our lives. So let's take that into a moment of prayer, if we could, and affirm that intention for ourselves and that awareness of each of us being deeply capable of living at this high end of the scale where we are nurturing the well-being of all, even as we ourselves are nurtured and uplifted and steadied and feel that love of God rising up from within us and folding us, even as we channel it outward toward others. This is truly a life of well-being, and it is available to us all through the power and presence of God in us. How grateful we are to know God is with us always. And so it is. Amen. All right, I'm going to invite Lynn and Joel back up. They have another song. This is kind of a traditional Christmas song in Hawaii, right? It's called Mele Kalikimaka by our Alex Anderson. I love this song. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Jingle bells upon a steel guitar.
Over the palms we see the same bright star.
Kalikimaka is the thing to say on a bright Hawaiian Christmas day. That's the island greeting that we send to you from the land where palm trees sway. Here we know that Christmas will be green and bright. The sun will shine by day and all the stars at night. Mele Kalikimaka is the wise way to say Merry Christmas to you.